Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have been an interesting case for Pokemon games when compared to something such as Sword and Shield. Whereas the latter was met with a lot of negative reception early on before the DLC improved some aspects of the game, and let people also appreciate the good that had been done with Gen 8 in general, such as move relearning being far easier. Criticism for Scarlet and Violet at first tended to boil down to some frame rate drops or the lag in online Tera raids, the latter of which seems far more frequent, at least in my experience. But Finn seemed to snowball into making the game an example of the Pokemon Company's failings. That's not to say I find Scarlet or Violet bad games. They're still some of the best games the franchise has produced, especially upon their release, with great ease of access tools that build upon the strides Legends Arceus made, such as easily changing up movesets, a story more ambitious than anything since Gen 5, with some of the best characters in the franchise, many great new Pokemon, and terrestrialization being the best gimmick. That I hope isn't restricted to Gen 9. It still wasn't perfect with the Tera raid lag, though the frame rate drops in regular play weren't as debilitating as many made it out to be, save for the lag that could come when raiding Ortega's base. But Finn started to sour the player base with multiple issues that came from each update, and backtracking on schedules. The most prominent issues were showcased in the update that allowed for pre-ordering the DLC, as well as during the Walk and Wake and Iron Leaves raids. One would be in the claim of fixing the lag that could occur in Tera raids not happening. But the bigger issue was in the glitch of those who hadn't updated their game receiving a bad egg in place of their Paradox Pokemon, until fixing it for the raid's return, and this eventually being followed by the save wiping glitch, and now a strange middle ground between them coming from the cancelled Great Tusk and Iron Treads raids recently. This is obviously a very poor series of events for one of the most profitable game franchises of all time, but also as disheartening are the broken promises and backtracking, with not just the raid lag, but the burning question of Pokemon Home compatibility, which went from a moment of excitement to disappointment in record time. I'll say the time taken with Pokemon Home is actually understandable, when there's a level of backwards compatibility which is obviously a far more ambitious and arduous choice than the Gen 8 games. But the problem is that the Pokemon Company set themselves a deadline, and have failed to uphold it, which shows irresponsibility, and that any other dates they've announced for major events will likely be delayed too. It also limits how much one can invest into the games without it, as the limited amount of boxes would otherwise force players to release some Pokemon. That is a lot more of a difficult situation in a game that has included so many variables, such as Tera taps. It would be easy to lambast the Pokemon Company or Game Freak for these failures, but Nintendo is likely the one to look towards when it comes to both the issues with Scarlet and Violet and recent Pokemon games in general. When comparing the reception towards other pillars of Nintendo, such as the most recent Legend of Zelda game, it shows the issues in Nintendo having Game Freak work on Pokemon rather than providing any assistance from other divisions, and we can even see an in-house example of this when comparing Game Freak passing over development on the Sinnoh remakes, while their main creative team dealt with Legends Arceus, and how it shows in the quality of these games, in Arceus being one of the most innovative and solid games to come out of the franchise, whereas the Gen 4 remakes were some of the most embarrassing. It must also be remembered the different roads these franchises walked down before their conversion with the Switch era. Whereas Zelda or Mario had more time to be honed from their main releases being on the larger memory consoles such as the GameCube or Wii, Pokemon was held back from playing catch-up in being limited to the handhelds beyond the odd spin-off title, with the difference in quality by the time all of them met on the hybrid console that is the Switch being an inevitability. All that said, the solution is obvious in that Nintendo providing more support for Game Freak, or for the latter to increase their staff will be a necessity if embarrassing pitfalls are to be avoided for the franchise in the future. That isn't to say the Pokemon Company should be absolved of blame though, as an inability to stick by proposed deadlines is still on them, and we can only hope this disheartening series of events doesn't continue, with them taking Scarlet and Violet's failings as a wake-up call to change for the better. Some will be cynical on Game Freak's desire to change things, or that they are only concerned about money. Painting the latter as something that would change in the hands of someone else is a bit naive though, as the main goal of a company is to create a profit. That said though, sales of the game slowly dying down in 2023, and the downhill reception of Gen 9 as opposed to the less hostile reaction to Gen 8 that occurred over time, doesn't bode well for a company hoping to maintain their constant schedule, or for future games to have the explosive release of Scarlet and Violet. Regardless what the Pokemon Company's motivation is, those in charge will have the common sense to know improving the situation and avoiding any similar scenarios in the future is what's necessary to keep the franchise profitable and stable. But once Pokemon Home comes to these games, as we've looked forward to, you needn't be disheartened, as you'll have the opportunity to get a Magearnet in Scarlet and Violet. If this video gets over 1000 views, I will do a Magearnet giveaway when the time comes. If interested in a few more giveaways I will do at that time, subscribe for updates and check out my videos to do with fixing the Kalos League, or my criticisms on Legends Arceus.